To be honest, I am regretting. I'm regretting why this dress is not mine. I actually made this for someone and I'm just wishing I made one for myself as well. Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Today I will be showing you how to sew this corporate dress made by Prudence, and it's an advanced sewing, to be honest. But one thing I strongly believe in is that even though you're a beginner, with the right sewing tutorial and you have your basic knowledge on how to use your sewing machine, just the general knowledge on how to sew, you can recreate any style. Okay, so I'll be showing you how to do this in 3 different steps. The first step is how to cut and sew a built-up collar using a princess dart. The second step is how to snatch the waist, because for the best results the waist needs to be snatched at least a little bit so that you can be able to use your zip as well on it. And then finally, the third step is how to create this pleated structure that you can see around the sleeve, and also how to create this suits structure that you can see on the dress. I'll also be showing you how to draft this sleeve, so I'll be showing you how to do all of that. So this video is packed, so you're going to learn a lot from it, so just keep watching. This is the fabric that I use for this dress. It is a crepe fabric and I use 2.5 yards. You want to make sure that the crepe is not too light and is not too thick for this particular style, and something that you can easily pleat. Okay, so right here I'll just go ahead and start drafting the pattern. I have a paper here that I'll be drafting, and the length of it is about 40 inches, which is a normal length of my pattern paper, but the dress is longer than that, so I'll just be using this to illustrate. So the first thing I did was to mark out 2 inches, which is going to be what I'll be using for the collar, that is the built-up neckline of this dress. So when you mark your 2 inch, you just go ahead and draw a straight line. So after that, this will now be where we'll be taking our body measurements from. So I'll just go ahead and label it the back, because I'll be drafting the back pattern first. So after that, I'll use my tape rule and I'll mark out my chest line measurements. So for the back pattern, I'll be needing just my chest line measurement. So my bust line measurement is 10 inches. I'll minus 2 inches from my bust line, and that is my chest line measurements. So after that, I'll go ahead and also mark my half length, that is my back waistline. So for the sake of this tutorial, I used 15 inches, that is my back waistline. I marked out 16, but I later changed it to 15, so my back waistline is 15 inches. Then after that, I'll mark my hip line measurements and also the length of the dress. I'm going to repeat the same thing on the other side, and I'll draw a straight line. So make sure you take note of your back waistline measurements, because we'll be also using it when we are drafting the front. So after that, now the next thing is I'm going to divide my bust measurement by 12. Whatever I get, I'm going to just mark it there on the top of the paper like so. So from this point, I'll go up by 1.5 inch, which is going to be the length of my collar. I'll go up by 1.5 inch also on the other side, and I'll make sure I trace out my 2.75 inches, which is my neck width measurements, on that 1.5 inch point. So with this, I'll be able to draw a very straight line like so. So after that, from that 1.5 inch, I will go down by half an inch, while from this other point I'll go in by half an inch like so. So I'll just use my French curve and I'll connect it this way. So after that, I'll go ahead to mark half of my shoulder measurements. So I'll mark it on this point, and I'll also mark it on the chest line like this. And then from that point, I'll go down by 1 inch and I'll connect it using a straight rule like this. Then I will still use my straight rule to connect it to my neck width measurements. And this will be the shoulder for this dress. So from this shoulder point, I'll go in by 0.25 inch and I'll use my French curve and I'll connect it this way. And this will be the built-up collar for the back. So now just go ahead and measure the distance from one point to the next. So I got 6.1 inch. I'll just go ahead and mark it there so that I will not forget. After that, I'll divide this line by 2. As you can see, I got 7 inches, so I'll just divide it by 2. And on the chest line, I'll go ahead and mark quarter of my bust measurements. So after that, I'll go in by 1 inch from this point, and I'll use freehand to just connect it, drawing the armhole for the back. Then on the waistline, in order to snatch my waist, I'm going to be minusing 2 inches from my normal waist measurement. So my normal waist is 27, minusing 2 inch, that is 25. So I'll divide my 25 by 4, and I'll mark whatever I get on the waistline. While on the hip line, I'll divide my hip measurements by 4, and I'll mark it there. So I'll just go ahead and connect it to the chest line and also to the waistline. So I use a French curve if you are a very curvy person. But for my own measurements, I'll just be using a straight rule, and I'll go ahead and curve it a little bit like so. So after that, on the length of the dress, I'm going to minus 1.5 inches from my quarter of my hip line measurement. So my quarter of my hip line measurement is 9.5 minus 1.5, that is 8 inches. So I'm going to be marking it on the length of the dress. So like I said, this is not up to the length that I need. I'm going to be extending it on the fabric when I'm cutting. So I'll just go ahead and cut out the lines that we have drawn, and I'll cut the waistline as well. So this part will be the skirt for this dress. So I'll be using the same pattern to cut for both the back and the front. So just label it so that by the time we are drafting the front, we are not going to be drafting the skirt part of it. So now this is the pattern that I'm using to draft the front, and from this point I'll just go ahead and mark my built-up collar, that is 2 inches for my built-up collar. So after marking the 2 inches, I'll use my straight rule and I'll connect it, drawing a straight line like this. So this, just like we did for the back, we are doing the same thing for the front. So from this line, I'm going to go ahead and mark my bust line measurements, my chest line measurements, my under bust measurements, my front waistline measurement, which is 16.5. So my front waistline is different from my back waistline. My back waistline is 15, but my front waistline is 16.5. So during the course of this front pattern drafting, I'm going to show you how you can make it equal. Okay, so I'll do the same, then I'll go ahead and mark my hip line measurements, and I'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other side of the paper, and I'll draw a straight line like so. So on the top of the paper, I'll just divide my bust measurement by 12 and I'll mark it there. I'll also go ahead and divide my shoulder by 2 and I'll mark it on the chest line as well and on the top of the paper. And from here, I'll connect a straight line and I'll go down by 1 inch and I will draw it, connecting it to the neck width like so. So after that, from this neck width, I'll go up by 1.5 inch, and from this 1.5 inch, I will mark 0.5 inch inward. Sorry for the lines that are showing. I actually started drafting without filming and I didn't know, and I had to start all over again. So while from that shoulder point, I'll go in by 0.25 and I will just connect it using a French curve like so. So from this point, I'll go down by 1.5 inch and I'll connect it using my French curve like so. So after that, on this new line now, I'll be going in by 1.5 inch as well, and I'll connect it using my French curve. So all these measurements I'm using is just what I prefer to use in order to get the perfect built-up neckline for myself. You can make adjustments if you want, but this is exactly what I use and this is what is working for me. So at this point now, I'll go ahead and measure from the neckline all the way to the shoulder like this. And if you can see, exactly what I have for the back is what I got for the front. So I got 6.1 inch, and I'll just go ahead and mark it there. So after doing this, the next thing we are going to do is I'm going to divide my bust span measurement by 2, and I'll mark it on the chest, on the bust line, and also on the waistline. And I'll go ahead and draw a straight line like so. So on the under bust line, I'll mark 0.75 inch on both sides, and this will be the darts that I'll be using. I'll do the same thing on the waistline, 0.75 inch on both sides, and I'll connect it drawing a straight line. While from the bust line, I'll go down by 1 inch, and I'll connect it to the under bust line like so. So just like we did for the back, I will divide this line by 2, which is 7. I'll divide it by 2, that is 3.5, and I'll go in by half an inch. While on the chest line, I'll mark quarter of my bust measurement on the chest line. So with my French curve, I will just connect it from the shoulder through the 0.5 inch all the way to the chest line like so. So the next thing now, I'll use my French curve to connect the midpoint of the armhole to the bust line measurements like so. So after that, on the armhole, I'll go in by 0.5 inch on both sides, and this will be the armhole darts that I'll be using to form the princess dart. So I'll just go ahead and connect it using the French curve again, using the French curve as well. So after doing this, the dart that is here is 1 inch. So I'll just go ahead and replace the 1 inch on the chest line like this. So from this point now, I'll measure from the armhole all the way to the waistline on one point, and I'll measure on the other side as well. One is 13.5 while the other is 12.5. So I'm going to extend the one that is shorter by 1 inch. Remember, 13.5 minus 12.5 is 1. So I'll just extend it by 1 inch, and I'll go ahead and use a French curve to connect it to the new chest line measurements. So this will be the new armhole for this dress. So after that, the next thing I'm going to be doing is to take my body measurement. So I'll go ahead and take my round under bust measurement plus the 1.5 inch, which is for the dart. And for the waistline, remember we are taking our snatched waistline measurement. So I'm using 6.25 for quarter of my waist measurement plus 1.5 inch for the darts. And I'll go ahead and connect it using a straight rule. So if you notice, it did not touch exactly my underbust measurements, but it's okay because when I'm sewing it, I will be taking the body measurement again, and I'll be using exact body measurement at that time. From this point now, remember our half length for the front is 16.5, while for that of the back is 15 inches. So I'm going to make it equal at the side seam. So in order to do that, 16.5 minus 15 inches is 1.5. So I'll just go ahead and mark 1.5 from the bust line measurements like so. So from that point, from that 1.5 inch, I'll just go ahead and connect it to the bust point. So we are doing this because we are joining the back to the front at the side seam. So this is the reason why I am removing the 1.5 from the side seam. So I'll just go ahead and mark out the darts that I'll be removing while I'm cutting the dress. Okay, so the waistline dart and the bust dart. So after this, the next thing now, on the hip line, I'm going to mark quarter of my hip measurements. Okay, and I'll connect it to the waistline like so. And then after that, the next thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking another piece of paper. I'm about to create that suit-like effect on the dress. Okay, so I'm going to be using another piece of paper, and I'm going to be joining it to the pattern paper like so. So I'll just join it and I'll tape it down, and I'll go ahead and mark 2 inches away from the center. So after I'll mark 2 inches, I'll draw a straight line and I'll cut it out like this. So at this point, I'll also go ahead and trace out my waistline on the new pattern paper that we just cut out. And then after that, from the midpoint, I'll mark 1.5 inches inward. And then from here, I'll go ahead and connect it to the built-up collar like this. And then after that, with my French curve, I'm just going to connect it. I'm just trying to recreate exactly what we have on the thumbnail, okay? So that's why I'm using my French curve, and I'm looking at the picture of it, and I'm just going ahead to trace out exactly what I feel is the correct thing. So I'll use my French curve and I'll trace it out, connecting it from the waistline all the way to the hip line. So just go ahead and try to create that curve that you can see on the dress. From the hip line, you can go up by 1.5 inch and you use your French curve to connect it like this, creating that curve that you can see on the dress. So from the hip line measurement, I'll go ahead and mark half of my bust span measurement, which is 3.5 inch. And then from this 3.5, I'll just go ahead and draw a straight line to the hip line. So from the hip line also, I'll go up by 2 inches as well, and then I'll go ahead and connect it to the dart points like so, forming the darts for the dress. So after that, I'll just go ahead and cut it out. So just pay attention to the lines I'm following while cutting. So while we are cutting at the side seam where we are going to be joining the back to the front, I'm just going to be taking the darts, which is the 1.5 inches that we drew out earlier. So I'll use my straight rule to connect the chest line to the waistline, drawing a new line like this. So I'll go ahead and continue cutting the remaining parts of the pattern paper. So after cutting, I'm going to be placing this on the fabric and I'll be cutting. I'm using the main fabric to cut as the lining, and that's why I placed it on fold. And if you notice, I slanted my pattern paper. I did not put it straight, okay? And after slanting it, you pin it down and you go ahead and cut. So I'm adding 0.25 inch all round, aside the armhole area. So for the side fronts, I added 0.25 inch all round, but for the side seam, I added 1 inch sewing allowance, while for the armhole, I did not add any sewing allowance. So by the time you open it up, this is what it should look like. So this is the lining and the down one is the main fabric. So for the main fabric, I've gone ahead to add hairstay to it, while for the lining, I went ahead to add paper gum to the collar part of it, all the way to the waistline, like so. So for the side fronts, this is the lining and this is the main fabric. So I've added hairstay to the main fabric, while the lining, I did not add anything to it, like this. So now I'm just going to be joining the main fabric of the side fronts to the center front. So I'll be joining it at the dart point. So I'll join it using the allowance we left while cutting, so using 0.25 inch. So after doing this, I'll also do the same thing for the lining as well. And after that, I'll just go ahead to remove the extra paper that we added to our pattern. Then after that, I'll go ahead to cut out the neckline for this dress. I'll also go ahead to cut it through the waistline like so, and I'll be placing this on the fabric to cut. But before then, I've gone ahead to cut the skirt part of the dress, and I added 0.5 inch to the waistline and 1 inch to the side seam. And for the front, I cut it on fold, and I also went ahead to extend it based on the length that I want it to be. And then for the back, I added 1 inch for sewing allowance, that is zipper allowance, and I did not cut it on fold, while every other thing is the same with the front. So at this side, this is the back fabric, and I've gone ahead to go in by 0.5 inch for the back, and I'll just go ahead to connect it to the hip line, and I'll cut it out like so. This is to eliminate bulginess at that point. So at this point, I've also gone ahead to cut for the bodice, and I've cut 2 pieces for the center front. One is for the lining and one is for the main fabric, and I've also cut 2 pieces for the side front as well. So for the center front, I added 0.25 inch sewing allowance to the point I'm showing, but I did not add any allowance to the armhole area. While for the side front, I've gone ahead to add 0.25 inch, but I added 1 inch for the side seam and no allowance for the armhole area. So by the time you open the center front, this is what it should look like, because we cut it on fold, and this is the main fabric. So I've gone ahead to add hairstay to it as well, and I've also gone ahead to add hairstay to the side front. So I'll be joining the side front to the center front using the allowance that we left while cutting. So I'll join it, and I'll also do the same thing as well for the other side. So when you're done, the next thing is, this is the back pattern. I've also gone ahead to place it on the fabric, and I've cut, and I added 1 inch for zipper allowance and 0.25 inch for the shoulder, 1 inch for the side seam, so by the time you open it up, this is what it should look like. So I've also gone ahead to cut the lining for the back, but I did not cut a full lining. I just cut half lining for it, and I've added paper gum to the collar area of the back of the lining. So now I'm just going to place it together, right side facing each other, and I'll sew using 0.25 inch sewing allowance, which is what we left while cutting. So this is the center front for the lining. I'm using the same fabric for the lining, and this is the side seam for the lining. So by the time you open it up, this is what you have, and I've gone ahead to add paper gum to the neckline area. Okay, so I'll do the same thing that I did for the main fabric. So at this point, I've joined the suit part of the dress at the side seam at the dart point. So I've joined it, connecting it, drawing the princess dart, and this is what it looks like for the main fabric. And for the lining, this is what it looks like. So I'm just going to be joining the lining to the fabric facing right side together. I will join using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. So from the neckline all the way to the hip line point. So after joining, you are going to notch it open so that you can be able to turn it to the right side. So by the time you're done, you turn it to the right side and you understitch it and press it very well. So for the bodice, this is what we have. So I've gone ahead to join the side front to the center front, and I've done the same thing for the lining as well. And remember, I added paper gum to the neckline area of the lining. So at this point now, I'll be joining the lining to the fabric facing right side together. I'll sew using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. So after you sew, you're going to go ahead and notch the midpoint of it like so that you can be able to turn it to the right side. Now also notch that sharp edge of the collar like this. So after notching, when I turn it to the right side, the parts that I'll be attaching that suit on, I'll be going in by 0.5 inch, and I'll connect it to the neckline like so. The reason why I'm doing this is because I want to be able to, by the time I'm joining that suit part of the dress to it, I don't want this one to be showing outside, and that's why I'm removing it. During the course of the video, you will understand why I did that. So I'll just turn it to the right side and I'll understitch it, and I'll press it very, very well, and this is what it looks like by the time I am done. So now I'll just go ahead to join the fabric to the lining at the side seam and also at the waistline, so that it will not be coming out when I am sewing. So at this point, I'll be joining the waistline of the skirt to the waistline of the bodice. This is not the waistline of the skirt, by the way. I was using the hemline as illustration, but I later corrected it. And this is the back, and this is what it looks like by the time I'm done turning it with the lining and under stitching it and pressing it. So after that, now I'm going to be joining the skirt part of the dress to the bodice. So I'll join it at the waistline like so, and this is what it looks like. So I've done the same thing on both sides, and this is what they look like. So now I'm just going to be joining the one side of the back to the other side. So in order to do this, from the hip line point, I'm going to be sewing all the way to about 10 inches away from the hip line. So from the hip line point, I'll use 1 inch, and I'll gradually increase it to 2 inches from that 10-inch point. So by the time I'm done, this is what it looks like. So I have successfully formed that slant that you normally see at the back of the dress, so that it can be fitting at the butt area. So by the time you join it, this is what it looks like. This will be for the zipper, and the down part is going to be for the slits of this dress. So after that, now this is what it looks like. So the next thing is I'm going to be joining this zip to it. So when you are snatching your waistline, be careful of the type of zipper that you are using. I used a very strong zip for it, and the reason is because I snatched my waist and I don't want the zip to rip open by the time I'm done sewing. So make sure you use a very strong zip. So after joining the bodice to the skirts at the waistline, this is what it looks like. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be joining the suit to the bodice. So I'm joining it at the shoulder point. So I'm joining the lining of the suit to both the lining and the main fabric of the bodice. So I'll join it starting from the armhole. I will sew to the neckline points, and at this point the suit should be longer than the bodice. So at this point I'll also go ahead to join the suit to the dress at the side seam like so. So after sewing, and this is what it looks like. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be joining the back to the front at the shoulder line. So I'm joining the main fabric of the front and the back together, and I'm joining the lining of the back and the front together. So make sure that the back and the front aligns at that midpoint. Okay, by the time you're done, you turn it to the right side. This is what it looks like. I've done the same thing for the other armhole as well, and this is what it looks like. So by the time I turn it to the right side, this is it. So the next thing is I will just go ahead and turn it to the wrong side, and I'll be joining it at the side seam. So I'll use the 1 inch sewing allowance that I left while cutting it. So by the time I'm done sewing, this is what it looks like. I'll just go ahead and pin and sew down that midpoint, that is the waistline of the suit to the waistline of the dress. So for the sleeve part of the dress, I'll just go ahead to place my fabric on fold, and I've drawn a straight line. So after drawing a straight line, from this straight line I will be dividing my bust measurements by 12, and I'll add 1.5 inches to it. So whatever I have, I'll just go ahead and mark it on the other side as well, and I'll draw a straight line like so. So after drawing the straight line, from this straight line I'm going to minus 1 inch from my chest line measurement, which is 7 inches, plus extra 1 inch for sewing allowance. While from this 7 inches point, I'm going to connect it to the other side, find the midpoint of the dress, go up by 0.5 inch, and then I will just connect it to the crown depth like so. So after connecting, the next thing I'm going to be taking my elbow length measurements. So my elbow length is 11 inches, and then from this 11 inches I'll go ahead and draw a straight line, and from this point I will mark half of my elbow width measurement. So after marking, I'll add 1 inch for sewing allowance, while I'll also go ahead and mark exactly where I want the flare to start from. So in this video I used 20 inches, but I later reduced it to 18 inches because I felt it was too down. So use 18 inches from the top of your fabric and just connect it to the other side, drawing a straight line like so. So whatever you get, I'm going to divide my sleeve width measurements at that point where I want the fleat to start from. I'll mark it and I'll go ahead and mark 1 inch for sewing allowance. And finally, I'm going to be marking the length of the sleeve. That's how long I want the sleeve to be. After marking it, I'm going to add about 2 inches or 3 inches to whatever I have from that flare point. I will just mark extra 2 inches to it or 3 inches to create that flare. So I have 5 inches there. I'll just add 2 inches, that's 7 inches. So I'll go ahead and connect it from the sleeve length all the way to the elbow and then to the crown of the sleeve. So after connecting, just go ahead and cut it off, and we are basically done with the drafting of the sleeve. Remember to add sewing allowance, of course, for the hemming. By the time you open it up, this is what it should look like. One thing to do also is to reduce the front part of the sleeve. That is the part that you choose to be the front. Just reduce it by 0.5 inch from the midpoint, and that's all. So the next thing is to create that structure that you can see on the sleeve. And in order to do that, I'm measuring from my midpoint in front all the way to my midpoint at the back. That's where the zipper line is supposed to be. Remember, I'll be attaching it through the zip, so I'll be adding extra 2 inches to whatever I get. So I have 18 here, I'll add 2 inches, that's 20. So this is the fabric that I use for the structure, and the smaller one is the lining, which is 5 inch for the width, and the length is about 20 inches or more than 20 inches, which is what we got while we measured. While the main fabric is ×3 of what we have for the lining. That is about 13 inches width, while the length is the same as the lining. So I'll just go ahead and take this to the pressing iron and I'll pleat it. So you can pleat this with your hands, like you use your needle to pleat it, hold it in place with the needle, and then you iron. You do this one step at a time and make sure they're as equal as possible. And when you are pleating, make sure you are trying to get back the 5 inches that is on the lining. Remember, we have the lining as the width of the lining is 5 inches. So I've pleated this 0.5 inch on both sides, and I tried my best to make it as equal as possible. So I used my pin to pin it down to make sure that it does not come out when I'm pressing it, and even while I am sewing. So I'll just go ahead and sew this at the side to hold it in place. That is at both ends to hold it in place. And now I will take the lining, I'll place it on it, and I'll sew using 1/2 inch on both sides, and I'll turn it to the right side, and this is what it looks like. So I've also gone ahead to sew it at the midpoint just to hold it in place, and this is what it looks like. So at this point, I've also done the button. I used the fabric to create that button, and I'm going to be sewing it on that point like so. But before then, I will just be attaching the sleeve to the armhole of the dress. So this is just basic knowledge on how to attach sleeve. I won't be saying much on this, so just attach the sleeve to the dress. And then for the structure that we have created, I'm going to be attaching it to the suit-like structure that is on the dress. Okay, so you attach it using your hand needle from the front, while for the back you attach it through the zip. So I'm pinning it down, but when you are sewing with your hand stitching, you are going to be joining it to the lining and not the main fabric, so that the stitching will not be showing outside. While for the zipper, I'm going to be opening that zip at that point, and I'm going to be putting it inside through the zip, and I will sew back the zip. Okay, so I've attached the sleeve to the dress at the armhole area, and at this point I've not sewn it, so I just secured it in place at that point just to show you how it's supposed to look like. And I'll go ahead and sew the buttons on it as well. So I just, using the thumbnail, I just want to recreate exactly what is there. So I'm placing the buttons according to how I am seeing it on the thumbnail. So I'm arranging it, and I used 7 buttons all through. Okay, So this is what it looks like by the time I am done with the sewing. So I've still not attached the structure to the zipper at this point. I'm yet to loosen the zipper so that I can fix that structure through the zipper line and then sew back the zipper. But this is what it looks like so far, and this is basically it for today's tutorial. If you watched to this point, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys, and just remember to like the video, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.